Finally, you're up.
What? Where are we? What's going on? I don't understand.
Just stuck here with me.
That's comforting. Still doesn't make sense, though.
You want your freedom back. You have to answer one important question. Cost is your life. Who is better? James Wan or Wes Craven?
I'll take Craven.
You're just jumping on this train. Okay, sure, yeah. I'll take one, I guess. I'd like to leave here alive, and apparently these are the stakes. I guess, have you seen anything lately? So, Wes Craven, take it away.
Well, I consider him probably one of the greatest contributors to horror. You know, one thing I know about his career is that he stayed in the genre, you know, his entire career. And so, like, he really did have a distinct style to everything he did. And when I go back to his beginning of his career, the first film that I can really think of is Last House on the Left, which was a, you know, very of its time film because it was during the time when rape and revenge films are, you know, being made quite a bit. But the one thing that sets his apart from the others is that I feel like his was actually filmed maybe with a little bit more taste than like films like I Spit on Your Grave, you know, because, you know, where there was rape content, you know, they did not linger on, you know, nudity and other stuff, and, you know, and actually I found it very interesting, you know, like the whole story in which, you know, like, because it ends with the parents having to take revenge for the daughter's death, and then the, like, villains themselves actually are, you know, well-written characters, you know, like, yes, they're despicable, but they actually, you know, are interesting, and I would compare it to The Devil's Rejects by Rob Zombie. Why that may or may not be an inspiration, that's one of my, you know, I could see a similarity there.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And, you know, I think it's also interesting, like, there are those stories about, like, Wes Craven trying to also, like, replicate the energy of, like, Vietnam War footage and things of that nature in Last House on the Left, with his framing, with a shot with that grittiness. And I agree with what you, like, said, is I think that him taking the topic so seriously, in the sense of, like, needing to show the true tragedy that that subject matter, you know, entails, the true heartbreak that entails, the agony. I think he approached those emotions into, like, you know, that are intertwined with that sensitive subject matter in such a way that it did allow it to feel a bit more tasteful, like you would say, artistic. There was a point of view with it, as opposed to kind of like I Spit on Your Grave.
But of course, whenever, you know, you follow his career, I would say his biggest contribution is probably Nightmare on Elm Street. Because what really makes that different than all the others is, you know, like, both, like Friday the 13th, you have to go somewhere to be in danger. Halloween, you know, something comes to your neighborhood, but you could leave or you could hide, you know, so. But Nightmare on Elm Street, you are getting stalked in your dream. Yeah, you have to sleep.
Yeah.
And, like, I just think the concept is, you know, was very unique, especially at the time, and, like, and also the inspiration for it is interesting too. I know that, like, for the actual dying in your sleep, I know there's actual accounts of that actually happening with somebody getting night terrors to that extent. I can't remember if those happened before the movie. I want to say they did, and you heard about it. But then the main inspiration I know for him, for the, you know, for the character of Krueger, I guess, you know, the terror that he wanted to convey with him, is apparently when he's younger, he's, you know, laying in his room or something, looks out the window, and a man's just standing out in the corner. And then, you know, he looks back again, the guy's still standing there. And he feels like the guy was staring right at him. I don't know for sure if he was, but
Either way, that'd make you write a horror film. Like, you'd go into the
And
genre.
of course, the other thing was there was actual accounts of, like, I guess, it actually was related to the production of the film. I know that he wanted to make Freddy Krueger a child molester, but I think there were some accounts of that going on in California, so he just made him a child killer,
Which probably, I think, for the best call. I don't think it would have the mainstream, lineage that it has at this point, or legacy, per se.
Child murder is just like, this person is just like practically pure evil.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, definitely taming that aspect of Freddy was smart. I would say I applaud that decision on Craven because, it just made it more of a monster that we could digest more regularly. I don't know if we all would have been running back for Nightmare on Elm Street 2 if that had been the subject matter. Like, that maybe would have been tough to go back for all, 7 sequels,
And the other thing Craven did different was with, involving Freddy is the fact that he made a talking, witty, horror villain, because, at the time it was mainly, mass silent antagonist.
Yeah, it was like you didn't know they were there, and they're not going to let you know they're there anyways. Freddy's going to, get in your face, Yeah. He wants this to hurt emotionally, too,
And then the other major contribution I want to go for with Craven is when the meta defined the 90s. First he did Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which took Freddy into the real world. But then, of course, his crowning achievement is Scream.
It so is. In my opinion, it's his greatest film. But that's just me.
That film just took all the cliches and brought attention to them and everything, and of course, they're more in the comedy horror genre, but they still have, the impact of horror in them, and it's funny because even the films themselves kind of did have maybe a little bit of a quality dip maybe for the third one, but then he came back with a fourth one. The fourth one was great.
Personally, I'm a Scream 2, Scream 4 guy. 3, but I mean, it's not a comment against him. He's an absolutely amazing director.
Overall, I'd say that, he's probably one of the most significant contributors to horror, and especially with, the meta and his, redefine, really making a unique concept during the 80s, which was oversaturated by slasher.
Oh, absolutely. And, I think it's so interesting that, you're talking about Wes Craven because, this guy made his career off of the time where the horror cliches were becoming cliches. They were, so common and so consistent in the genre that was kind of the birth of so many tropes and cliches and whatnot, which opened the doorway for some really talented filmmakers of today to take those and redefine them. And I think the person who's done that possibly the most successfully in the modern day is James Wan. The most interesting modern horror director for me for a lot of reasons, in the sense that his career was started almost like a parody of the films he had grown up loving. You can say, Saw with him, starting with Saw with his partner Lee Winnell. Huge success, fun take on a slasher film, but also a mystery crime thriller. He's flexing that other part of his brain that shows he also has a love for all cinema, much like Craven.
Yeah, with the Saw franchise, I'm not a big fan of the, torture porn stuff, but I do think the first one was the
first one's unbelievable. Yeah, I mean, it was groundbreaking. And unfortunately it is slapped with that sticker of kicking off the torture porn wave along with Eli Roth's Hostel. But, there's so much more to Saw. People misremember that movie. When you go back and watch it, it's an incredibly clever, fast-paced, tricky crime thriller with an element of horror. I mean, there's very little gore in that entire first movie. I think probably the goriest shot of that film is at the very end of him cutting his foot off, But you see James Wan come in and just dominate with this kind of redefining of the slasher genre. But then he pulls this awesome move and shows up with Insidious and pays respect and homage, again with Lee Winnell, to films like Poltergeist and these beautiful films that have this homey, family atmosphere that then has horror introduced to it. So he not only has played with the most extreme of your fears of I'll never wake up chained, in a place I didn't go to sleep in, but then he tackles terrifying things can happen behind your front door, next to your kids, next to your wife, and he did that not only with Insidious, but then with The Conjuring. he's just such a good example for inclusive horror films that, you know, like there's people say like mainstream horror, you know, a lot of big studio horror is a bad word. But I think James Wan has shown that the money of Hollywood and the grime of horror can work perfectly together. I mean, Saw was one of the most successful franchises of all time. I think it may still be the most successful horror franchise. I may be wrong on that. But between that and then Insidious and The Conjuring, I mean, he just comes out swinging, and they're nothing but home runs.
That's like what my thought about his career is that, like, through the like you know, horror subgenres, I say really defined the 2000s and maybe even into the 2010s was torture porn and supernatural horror.
Yeah, a lot of pumped out supernatural horror.
I knew Saw, which helped launch that, and then of course, you know, you had, you know, like Insidious, Conjuring, and then along that same time, you know, you got all these, you know, the Paranormal Activity films.
I mean, I would definitely say James Wan was at the center of kind of like, you know, whether it's your taste or not, he was at the front line of the birth of modern horror. You know, he came in and while showed that we are educated fans that have done our homework and our research and have watched the films from, you know, all the way back to, you know, the 60s to now, we do have a love for modern filmmaking as well. And so while paying respect to the roots of what his genre is built on, he has also found a way to be innovative and move the genre forward while never forgetting like where it started. And that is just intoxicating to me about him. And I would say that also is a part of his skill set, just being a well-rounded cinematic, you know, expert. I mean, look at, you can hate it or leave it, but I mean, the guy also made Aquaman and Fast 7, you know? Like, he took millions and millions of dollars compared to what he's ever had to make something chaotic and exciting. I would also say with both Craven and Wan, they're also both really good examples of how successful a creative partnership can be. I mean, Wes Craven and Kevin Williamson, you know, without them, we don't have the Scream franchise and we don't have the meta taste for horror that we have today. Without James Wan and Lee Winnell, I mean, we don't have the entire Conjuringverse. We don't have, you know, like the rebirth of supernatural and slashers, but also we don't probably have the torture porn genre, which I hate that term, but it is sadly the only term you can really use for it at this time. But, you know, it's just a comment on they're both people that just see the necessity in working with like-minded and passionate individuals. So we've talked about him. We've talked about Wan, we've talked about Craven, but what is like your favorite Craven film? Like the Wes Craven film?
Now for me, it has to be Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah, I saw it coming, but yeah.
It's really is the franchise that got me into horror because
really,
when I was younger, I wasn't into it, you know. But like, I think I remember watching Nightmare on Elm Street on like, you know, like I think like a marathon or something on some channel, and then I watched like, I think I missed the first one, but I watched like maybe like third, fourth, fifth or something, and I really got interested in it. And then I finally, you know, got around to watching the other installments, and you know, and overall, I actually really do like it just because of the whole dream concept. It's like it's kind of like one thing I know like with films like Inception, it's like, okay, this is what they really dream. It's kind of boring, but then you know, Nightmare on Elm Street, the dreams that they go into, it's like, wow.
Yeah, gives it some grime, some much needed grime. Yeah. People, you know, you hear Nightmare on Elm Street. I don't know if I actually know anyone not like a diehard, super cinematically educated fan of the genre. But if you say Nightmare on Elm Street, I don't know anyone that's going to say Nancy or that's going to say Johnny Depp off the top of their head. The average audience goer, the average, you know, citizen is going to hear Nightmare on Elm Street, and that image is right in their head. They hear Freddy Krueger, they know exactly what you're talking about. No, so, I mean, I think Nightmare on Elm Street, you're not going to ever list the 5 most important horror franchises without bringing up Freddy Krueger. I'd say Nightmare on Elm Street is definitely one of his most important films. When it comes to James Wan, I don't think there is a more successful, from beginning to end film that is exactly what was intended and is what was received by audiences as Insidious. I think Insidious is just this bizarre, obscure little, note in the history of Hollywood that is so fun because, you have James Wan and Lee Winnell coming back and everyone's like, oh, they're gonna do another slasher. They're gonna do another, torture-based film. They're gonna do another isolated horror film. But instead, they take this Spielbergian approach to this very realistic family that you care about. The children are charming. The husband and wife, yes, they have problems, but there's love there. And you just, throughout the first 40 minutes of that movie, are so welcomed into this family that there's parts of you that, like, in moments forget it's a horror movie going on because you're just kind of having lunch with Rose Byrne and it's delightful, And I mean, just the casting of that film is amazing. But then you have just such raw, amazing writing power from Lee Winnell, James Wan's, creative partner, not only helming such an amazing script that pays tribute to all these haunted house films from the past and respects the formula, but then brings in these new twists on these characters. But James Wan, and he just makes you love them. He gives you this cast of characters that are on this little adventure together, and the adventure, while ultimately terrifying, still feels mystical and quest-like. With James Wan, it's just, ultimately what I can say is while it's so hard to do in horror, makes something both feel epic and homey and also terrifying. And I think Insidious is just kind of the perfect culmination of all three of those traits. It's my favorite film of his. It's one of my favorite movies. I'm gonna love it till the day I die. So it's been absolutely delightful to sit here and talk about both these guys with you. But I am curious, do you have any idea when this guy's gonna let us go?
Actually, you can go. I just needed someone to talk to.